I'm gonna sit here in my comfy chair, sipping the last bit of my dandelion lemonade, and I'm gonna tell you some of the challenges that I had with this dandelion video, which might end up being multiple videos by the time this is released. I had so many things that I wanted to talk about and say, from in the garden to in the kitchen, that it took me a while to do. And of course, I felt like I had to keep stopping the video to do the rest of my life. And then I had to wait for this t-shirt to make it out of the laundry again before I would start up again. I'm pretty sure my pants changed many times in different cuts of this particular video, but I had a really fun time doing it. I don't know if I'm going to release it as a series of small videos, because we've got the dandelions out in the garden, what they do positively for the garden, as well as how to harvest them, and what to look for when choosing dandelions and not other weeds that are not dandelions but look similar. And then I brought it into the kitchen and I did some dehydrated root for tea, as well as some roast root to go with chopped vegetables. And then I did some things with the leaves, cleaning up the leaves. I've had them in salads. I've done them in spanakopita style things. Anything that you would use spinach or arugula in, you can use dandelion in. I think I did a Thai roll with them, like a spring roll, but I don't know if I caught that on video. It's been almost a month of me working on this video, so I really hope it turned out well. And then, of course, there was the slow process of harvesting blossoms. I found that I couldn't get them all at once and pluck them out and put them into the sparging bag. I had to put the sparging bag into the freezer and only do a little bit at a time, and of course that took a while. So this video has been at least a month, possibly, yeah, I think it's about 2 months in the making, and I hope you like it. Hi, it's sunny, and normally I'd wear a hat, but it's also really windy, so what can you do? Just put on some sunscreen. I'm going to talk to you today about dandelions. They're around. There's one. Actually, there's several. I'm going to pick the blossoms, take them inside and do something with them. But dandelions are actually really beneficial, though they're pretty much considered a weed. One of the good things that they do is they punch a root deep down into the soil, which helps bring oxygen from the surface down low and also brings nutrients from down underneath up to the surface. That's a problem that I have with my lawn, because my lawn happens to have sort of a thick clay soil that isn't very good for getting oxygen down. And every time I pull up a dandelion, I find 1 or 2 worms around there, and the worms are using that dandelion to get themselves some oxygen so they can do their wormy business. Check this out. See that little tiny miniature bee? That's one of our native pollinizers. It's not a European honeybee. I don't know if this is a mason bee or not, but dandelions are very important because they're one of the earliest blooming of all the flowers. And so a lot of bees, both honeybees and native bees, need these flowers to get enough energy for the rest of the year. So I'm gonna just leave that blossom alone instead of harvesting it. Now the dandelion is compound flower. That bee is walking around because each one of those petals is leading back to a pocket of nectar, and down at the very bottom of that is a seed that's getting pollinated by that bee crawling around, and that's what leads to these pom-poms here. Each one of those seeds came from an individual blossom that was out of that main stem. So that bee was just enjoying a huge meal of multiple flowers all in one spot. Now when it comes to some of the benefits that dandelions give, Clover can give a lot of the very same benefits. They don't bloom as soon as dandelions do, so they're not quite as early of a nectar benefit for the pollinators, but clover does send out a web of roots that can break up stiff and tough soil. So I would rather have more clover than more dandelions. So I'll talk about eliminating some of your dandelions, but you're never going to get them all. Now, if you're early enough in the season, you can pick dandelion greens and enjoy them in salads or in scrambles. You can use them like spinach or arugula, adding them in to supplement some lettuce. You can just pull off the leaves like that, rinse them off, and they'll be really good. But if you want to get the roots, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and I'm going to show you some of the techniques that I use. One of the first things you should do is take off all the blossoms. Dandelions are seed-making machines, so if you just mow over the top of them, you're going to end up with seeds all over the place. Every time you get one before it's done the puffball thing, you've just saved yourself 100% of those seeds going out into your yard. You can eat the unopened blossoms in just your mixed greens. You can take the petals, sprinkle them in for a little bit of color on top of salads or in other dishes. I like to harvest them. What am I going to do with those blossoms? Well, I'm going to be making some dandelion blossom syrup, which I can then turn into dandelion jam or dandelion wine. So I'm going to show you four different ones. Ones that you have to be kneeling down, grubbing around the garden, and two stand-up variations. We've got the weed fork, a regular planting trowel. We have the stand-up weeder, and we have my bulb planter. I'm going to show you how each of these works. First up is the weed fork. You know what? It looks like it should work, but I find it very difficult. You're supposed to shove it right down next to the root, straight down to it, and then wiggle it around, and boom, it should pop it out. I would say 2 out of 3 times I'm going to end up breaking off the root instead of actually getting the whole thing out. Now, if I'm just wanting to harvest greens, that's no big deal, but if I'm actually wanting to remove the root so that I can roast the root and turn it into dandelion root tea or roast it with my vegetables, the fork is not my favorite. So, let's talk about the trowel. So, the trowel, it's really nice and handy. This is what I use for planting bulbs. It's got a little measuring thing so I know how deep I'm digging my hole. I just put it right next to the roots, dig a little bit around, and pop it up. And I find that this actually helps me get more of the root out, but a lot of soil comes with it, so I have to take out the plant, and then anything that's not dandelion I've got to shove back into the hole that I made. But hey, I get a lot of the root and all of the greens, but it's a bit of a mess when it comes to the soil. But, you know, you get to see all of those worms and things like that I was talking about. They're really beneficial. So, yeah, just put the plugs back into the ground and go at it. I find that, 3 out of 3, I can get the roots, greens, and everything when I'm using a hand trowel. However, it is a bit more work in putting the soil back, but man, you can get some really good dandelions with that. Now for the stand-up versions, this one here, you know what? I didn't buy this. This is my guy's thing. He had this when I met him, and at first I was skeptical. I'm like, what do you do? So, okay, read the instructions, push it down, step on it, and pull back, and ta-da! It seems to actually work. A weirdo one-use gadget actually works. Usually I'm all for multitaskers, but that seemed to make it really easy. Didn't have to bend down or anything. I stand corrected in my dislike of monotaskers. However, I find this mostly works for the smaller dandelions with smaller roots. If you've got a monster dandelion, you're going to have to bring out the big guns, which is a shovel or a bulb planter. This is my bulb planter. I really like it. It's really handy for doing bulbs in the fall and anything like that. I love it for planting a variety of plants. When it comes to dandelions, it's just a stomp and a twist and boom, a big clod of soil comes out, but you get, I would say, 90 to 100% of the root when you do that. You might need to shake it a little bit to get it loose, but it's pretty much all in there. It does chop off the leaves and any blossoms that are sticking out. So this is great for getting the roots, but if you want to get the leaves, just pick the leaves, put them in a little basket, and then get the roots on a second go around if that's what you're into. If you're just trying to remove the weeds, this works really well, but again, you've got to stomp those soil clods back in. It's a good time to add soil looseners or some other sort of nutrients to the soil because you already dug down deep. It's a good multitasker in the garden because it makes uniform holes, so if you buy plants in small pots, you can just quickly throw them into the ground. You just go through, put a bunch of holes into the ground, and then throw in your plants. So as a multitasker, this one is good, but it's not as nice as that unitasker tool, at least when it comes to not disturbing a bunch of soil when you're digging out the weeds. So here's the review. If you're going to buy something, I would not recommend the weed fork. This one bent when I was using it. Even though it looks sturdy, it's not as good as a regular trowel. And when you get a trowel, try to get something long and narrow. This one's really good for planting bulbs and other plants because it's got a measuring stick right on the blade of it. So don't go with a unitasker, go with something a little bit more useful. Now maybe your soil is different than mine, maybe your soil is a little bit looser, not as densely packed. And if you find the forks work, great, but I just didn't find it in this one. Now, when it comes to the stand-up removal of any kinds of weeds, I actually was really impressed by this, I think it's like a Turf King or something like that. It really did work, but it mostly works on the smaller dandelions. When it comes to the bigger ones, I'm going to want a shovel, a hand trowel, or the bulb planter. And I like having the bulb planter because I do plant a lot of plants in the spring for vegetables as well as in the fall for floral blooms. So if you want a multitasker, go with a shovel or a bulb planter, but if you want something that really just gets those dandelions out pretty efficiently, you know what? That Turf King isn't that bad. Hang on, I've got dandelions coming up between my bricks. Well, dang, that sucks. And really, unless you want to go the poison route, which I am not a big fan of, instead of using a weed killer, I actually boil them. That's right, I heat up a pot of boiling water and I pour it over the top, and it just kills the foliage as well as the roots. If I were doing this in a driveway or a walkway in the center area where I knew there wasn't going to be any leaching out into the surrounding garden, I would actually use salt water, like the water that I boil potatoes or pasta in. But if it's something that's going to be closer to the edge of a planting or my lawn or something like that, and I don't want to salt the fields like Romans taking over Carthage, what I'd probably do is just heat up the coffee pot, boiling water, and just pour it on there. Steams them up really nicely, then I just scrape them away once they're all dried up. Now, while I dig out this massive, gigantic dandelion that flourished right next to one of my water faucets, I want to talk to you about some things that are not dandelions that you cannot do these same things with. One is thistles. There's snow thistles, Scotch thistles, all kinds of thistles. Basically, if it's spiky, it's not a dandelion. Dandelions have a more lettuce-like leaf that has a sawtooth shape, but no actual spikes to it. So if you see something with spikes, not a dandelion, get rid of it. It's not good for you. Another one is cat's ear. It has a similar looking flower, but its leaves also don't have that distinct sawtooth shape and are fuzzy. Usually the stems, instead of being sort of soft hollow tubes, are more woody in texture, and oftentimes will have multiple blossoms at the head. So if it's fuzzy leafed with a hard woody stem on the blossoms, again,
not a dandelion, though I don't believe that cat's ear is toxic. Technically, I don't think thistle is toxic. But the most dangerous look-alike is the tansy ragwort. Tansy ragwort has bright blossoms, but they're in clusters, and its leaves have more of a sort of lacy fern-like look to them, and they're considered a very noxious weed. So if you've got those in your yard, you need to get rid of them. They are not good for livestock, and they're not good for humans either. Now, this mass of dandelion is going to make its way into some delicious culinary adaptations. Stick around and join me for part 2 in the kitchen.